Hi there guys, and welcome to another video. So this video is going to be continuing looking at ZFS on Unraid. And this video will show how to manage your native ZFS pool on your Unraid server, but using a GUI with what I call the hybrid method. Sounds interesting? Then let's get started. Initiate sequence ZFS hybrid mode. Initiate fusion sequence. Now the good news for us Unraiders is to use the hybrid method, we don't need to merge our DNA with that of a fly, so that's a bit of a bonus. So anyway, just what is this hybrid method I'm talking about? Well, it means having a native ZFS pool on your Unraid server, but when you need to manage that pool, maybe create an extra dataset, repair the pool, then to do that we just fire up a TrueNAS VM and use the tools in that to be able to make any changes we want to our ZFS pool. And then when we're done, we shut down the VM and continue using the ZFS pool natively on your Unraid server without the need of using the VM. Now, if you haven't watched any of my earlier ZFS videos, then I really suggest you go back and watch them first before watching this video, because you're going to need to know how to set up the TrueNAS VM in this video here. And also it's a good idea to have some knowledge of setting up a ZFS pool on Unraid as well. And that you'll see in my last video that you can watch here. Right, okay. So in the last video I set up this native ZFS pool on these 3 disks here. So just to recap, I'm going to open a terminal window, and to look at the ZFS pools on the server I'm going to type zpool status. We can see here the name of the pool is Battlestar, it's RAID Z1 and made up of these 3 disks. And so what we're going to do now is remove this zpool from Unraid, which is called exporting the zpool. And then we're going to add the disks that make up this zpool to the TrueNAS VM and then manage it from there. And to do that I need to type zpool export and then the name of the pool, and that pool's now exported.
Hey, wait there, Space Invader. Don't you think you should warn people that before exporting the pool, that they should make sure nothing is actually using it?
Yeah, what happens if they are storing their app data or even their VMs on the pool?
Yeah, thanks guys, that's a good point actually. Yep, before you actually export the pool, make sure there's nothing on the server using it. So if you've decided to store your app data on the pool, you're going to need to stop all of your Docker containers before exporting the pool. And the same obviously goes for VMs. If you're storing any VMs on the pool, then you're going to need to stop those VMs first as well. Okay, so let's move on now. The zpool's been exported, so now let's run zpool status again and see what that comes up with. So that says no pools are available. Now if you see that, don't worry, it doesn't mean that the pool's been deleted. It's just the same as when a drive isn't mounted, Unraid can't see it. Right, so now the pool's been exported, we can close that terminal window. Now if you remember in my last video, I kept a note of all of the disk IDs of these 4 disks here in a text editor, which I'm going to bring back up now. So let's go across to the VMs tab now, and you can see I've got a TrueNAS VM here. If you're not sure how to set up a TrueNAS VM, then please see my earlier video on how to do that. And if we edit the template here, I've given it 2 cores, 8 gigs of RAM, and at the moment there's only 1 V disk, which is the boot disk for the VM. Yeah, and obviously the location for this V disk is not on the ZFS pool. It can't be, because otherwise the VM wouldn't be able to start up. So the boot disk for the VM, it must be on the Unraid array or on an Unraid cache drive. Now in the video where I set up a TrueNAS VM, we passed through a whole disk controller, as you can see here, and obviously when I passed through this disk controller it didn't have any of the Unraid disks on, no array disks or cache disks, so it was fine to pass that through. However, this server, it only has one disk controller in it, and obviously that's shared with the Unraid disks and the ZFS pool. But on this server, there's no disk controller available for me to better pass through, so I'm going to pass through the individual disks that are attached to the main controller on the server. So here I'm going to add 3 extra V disks for the 3 disks that are in my zpool. Now I need to know the individual disk IDs of which disks I'm going to be passing through, so I need to bring up my text editor again where I've got those stored. So out of the 4 disks you can see here, it was the bottom 3 that I assigned to the zpool. So it's those 3 disks that I'm going to add over onto the TrueNAS VM. And to do that I need to swap the VDisk location from auto over to manual. And on this line for the location here, I need to put /dev/disk/ by-id and another / and then I need to copy the ID of the first disk here. I'm going to put it onto the clipboard and then paste it in here at the end. Right, so that's the first disk done. So obviously I need to do the same for the second and the third disk as well. Well, it's going to be boring for you to watch me do the same again for the next disk, so let's speed it up and skip to when it's done. Right, so that's all done, the disks are now added. We can leave the VDisk bus as it is as vert.io, but there is one extra thing we need to do to these disks before we're finished. But first we need to scroll down and click update, and the thing we need to change is in the XML view. So let's go back to the VM and click edit, and switch from form view over to XML view. Now I'm going to scroll down till I see the disks which are here. This first one is the boot disk, which is the V disk. Then these 3 disks are the pass-through disk. Now normal file V disks on the Unraid server have a write cache into the RAM, which is set by default. We need TrueNAS to be able to have direct access to the disk, so we don't want to have a write cache at all. So what we need to do here is change the cache setting from write back here to none. And so obviously we need to change the same for each of the other pass-through disks as well, changing the cache from write back to none. So with that done now we can scroll down to the bottom and click on update. Right, good, so with that done we've done all the preparation, we've exported the zpool and we've added the zpool disk to the VM. So now let's start up the TrueNAS VM and then manage the pool.
Space Invader, can I just stop you there a minute? I bought a disk controller for my ZFS pool. How can I use that with both Unraid and a VM? If I stub it to pass through, then Unraid can't see it, so how do we get around that?
Yes, and I have a NVMe pool natively on my server. I would like to manage it with the VM, but same problem, if I stub it then Unraid can't see it. It's only available for the VM.
Okay, yeah, well that's actually really easy to solve. To do that, let's go across onto another Unraid server where I've got an NVMe pool there. Okay, so here on this server, these 3 NVMe disks make up a RAID Z1 pool. And actually this disk here as well, this is another ZFS disk, but it's a USB external disk which I use for backups. So I'll quickly remove it from the server so we just see the 3 NVMe disks on their own. Okay, so it's these 3 NVMe drives that are part of a RAID Z1 pool. And there's 2 ways that we could pass through these to a VM. So let's head on over to the VMs tab, and if we edit the template we could do exactly the same as we did before and just pass through the disks by their disk ID. This will work fine with NVMe drives, SSD drives or normal mechanical drives. But the other way to do it is just to pass through the NVMe controller directly itself. But scrolling down to the bottom of the template there's no PCIe devices available to pass through because it hasn't been what you call either stubbed or bound to VFIO. So let's get that done and go to Tools, System Devices. Okay, so here's 1, 2 and 3. There's the 3 NVMe controllers. So I'll bind them to the VFIO. And then for that to take effect I need to reboot the server. Okay, so now the server's rebooted. Yep, we can see because those devices have been stubbed, they're not viewable by Unraid. So what we're going to do is go back to the VMs tab here and edit the VM. And there we can see the 3 controllers here. So I'm going to pass them through to this VM and click update. But now because those 3 NVMe controllers have actually been passed through to the VM, I can now unstub the controllers, then reboot the server, and the NVMe controllers will still be able to be passed through to the VM whenever I start it up, but they'll also be visible by Unraid because they're not stubbed. And so now the server's rebooted up, we can see them again here. And if we go back across to the VMs tab and edit the template of the VM, and scroll back down to the bottom of the template, we can see they're still passed through, even though they're no longer stubbed. And now if I export the zpool and then start up the VM, now if we go back to the main tab here, and now we can see that Unraid can't see the disks. This is because the NVMe controllers are now passed through to the VM, and so Unraid can no longer see them. But when we actually stop the VM, they'll all return back here.
Ah, I see. So you don't have to leave a device bound to VFIO, you can bind it so it shows in the template, then after adding it to a VM, we can then unbind it so it can be used both in Unraid and in a VM, and that works for any PCIe device, yeah?
Yep, it should work basically for anything. In fact, when I pass through a USB controller to my VMs like a Windows or Mac VM, I do it exactly the same way. I don't have the devices stubbed. And the advantage for me for that is the keyboard I have plugged into that USB controller. When the VM's running, the keyboard's passed through to the VM, but when it isn't running, then Unraid is using the keyboard.
Right, okay. I can see that could be useful.
Okay, so let's move on and go back to the other server, start up TrueNAS, and then start managing the pool, making some changes to the pool using TrueNAS. Now I think I'll open the VNC window so I can see what the IP is when TrueNAS is finished booting. Okay, so here's my IP address, 10.10.20.200. So I'm going to close this, open a new tab, pop in the IP address, and then log into TrueNAS. Okay, so here we are on the TrueNAS dashboard. Now what we need to do now is to import the zpool from the pass-through disk from the Unraid server. And so to do that, on the left-hand side, let's click onto Storage, and then click Pools. And as expected, we can't see any pools listed here because I haven't imported the pool yet. So in the top right-hand corner, I'm going to click on the blue button to add. I don't want to create a new pool, I want to import a pool. So I'm going to check this here and click Next. My pool wasn't encrypted, so I'm just going to click No and continue with import. And I'm going to click on this drop-down box here, and we can see my zpool here. And I'm going to click Next, and then click Import. Okay, and so here's my pool. Everything looks right. I've got one data set here, my LZ4 compression, and we can see the compression ratio. It's not set to read-only, and I'm not using deduplication. Okay, so there's the pool imported. So if I wanted to add another data set, I can easily do that. And I'm going to call this one VMs. In an upcoming ZFS video, we're going to be looking at using a zpool on Unraid, storing our VMs there and our app data, etc. Now normally I wouldn't create a data set for VMs that wasn't on an SSD zpool, as it would be a bit slow otherwise, but this is just a demonstration, so ignore the fact that it isn't an SSD zpool. Okay, so these settings here, I'm going to leave them all as they are.
Hey Space Invader, I know you want to leave these settings as default, but what do these settings here actually do?
Yeah, I'd be interested to know that too.
Okay guys, sure, we can take a look at that. Okay, so all of these three settings here, you'll see that at the moment, they're all set as inherit. That's because they're inheriting their settings from the main zpool. Now the first one here, sync. When this is set to standard or always, when a file's written to ZFS, it will only report back that the file is written when it's actually physically on the disk. However, if we set this to disabled, this can make writes faster, but not quite so safe, because the system will report back the file is written, even if it's still in the RAM and hasn't actually been flushed through to the disk. So maybe you'd want to set this to disabled for something where the data's not too important, where maybe a video editing data set. I'm going to leave it as standard for this data set here. And again, compression level here, we've spoken about that in previous videos. It's currently inheriting the LZ4. So whether you leave this on or off, or choose a different compression, that's up to you with what your use case is. In fact, as this is for VDisks and I mainly use QCOW2, as QCOW2 doesn't take up as much space as a raw VDisk, I could just leave this compression off if I wanted to, but what you choose is really just up to you. And finally here, enable A time, and so A time stands for access time. So if we were to disable this, ZFS won't record the access times of files, which really probably isn't a really big deal for most use cases. You know, would you really miss if you couldn't see when a file was last accessed? I wouldn't, to be honest. So theoretically, if the file system's got one less job to do, well, I guess it should be faster. So leaving this off, if you don't need it, theoretically this should improve the speed of the dataset because it's not recording the access times. Now here, encryption options. As all of the other ones, this is inherited from the actual main pool, and it's not encrypted. Now, if I wanted to encrypt the dataset, if I uncheck this, And the encryption type, I can use either a key or a passphrase. I'd normally use a passphrase, it's much easier. And the passphrase needs to be at least 8 characters and it needs to be entered twice. And that's all you need to do to encrypt the dataset. Of course, you could swap from the default algorithm to another if you wanted to, but the default one's good, so for most people that's what they'd use. But for me, I'm not going to use encryption at all. So I'm going to recheck this box so it inherits it from the main pool, so it's not encrypted. Now the reason I'm making this video is to try and make it easier for people who don't want to use command line with their ZFS pool. So for that reason I'd advise those people not to use encryption at all. Because if you import a zpool with encrypted datasets inside, you have to first unlock those datasets with the encryption key and then mount them separately. So there's a lot more command line things to do if you're using encrypted datasets. Now I'm not actually going to show how to unlock an encrypted dataset in Unraid, but I will show you the commands that you would use for those people that are interested. Okay, so moving down the list, let's look at deduplication. Again, this is something I wouldn't recommend most people to use. It's very RAM intensive, and what it does is it can save space. By any files that are duplicates, it gets rid of them and just keeps one copy of it, where the others are kind of linked back to that. But for most people to save space, compression's the way forward, and deduplication is just for advanced users. And moving down again, here under case sensitivity, this is just basically whether the files are case sensitive or not, and you can set it from sensitive, insensitive or mixed. For most people, sensitive is fine and it should be left as that. And moving down again, share type we don't have to worry about, because well, we're not going to be using shares in TrueNAS. We're going to be using this pool on Unraid natively. Okay, so that's a brief overview of what all those options mean.
Just one more thing, Space Invader. What's that advanced option button there? Can we look at that?
Now let me think about that for a moment. No. Sorry, but this isn't a deep dive into TrueNAS. It's just showing how to basically manage an Unraid ZFS pool, but using a VM.
Okay, got it. So we need to get back on topic then, yeah?
Yep, exactly. So let's click on Submit to create this dataset. Now we don't have to set the ACL for the dataset. We're not using it in TrueNAS, so all we need to do is just click Return to Pool List. And there we can see the second dataset there, the VMs one's been created. And so when we import the pool back into Unraid, we're going to see all the datasets that we create here. So whilst we're here, I'm going to create another dataset. I'm going to create one for the app data, everything here being left as default. And so there's the third dataset there for the app data. So both of these datasets, the VMs and the app data, I'm going to connect them to the Unraid server later on as the app data location and the location for new VMs. Now we could just leave the datasets like this and have Unraid create folders in each for new containers or new VMs, and that would work fine. And we could use snapshots on both of these datasets and then clone off a snapshot or roll back to a previous snapshot if we wanted to recover data. But say we have multiple VMs in the VMs dataset and we made some kind of error on the VM and wanted to roll back to an earlier state, that would roll back all of the VMs that are in that dataset to that same earlier state. So what we'd have to do instead then is, rather than roll back the dataset, we'd instead clone the dataset off an earlier snapshot, and then from that clone of the earlier time, we'd copy the vdisk across into our original VM dataset, fixing it that way. But we could make the recovery process much easier if we were to create individual datasets for each VM inside the main VM dataset. That way, we could just roll back the dataset for the VM we want to restore without having to do anything else. So let's set up a sub-dataset for the VMs now. Let's do one for Windows 10. So to create a sub-dataset, we need to go to the right-hand side and click on the 3 dots on that dataset, and then click Add Dataset. Again, we just fill in the name and any options we want, and then just click Submit, and then Return to Pool. And there we've got that dataset as a sub-dataset of the VMs one. So I'm going to do exactly the same for the app data dataset. I'm going to create a sub-dataset for Crusader, and then put the Crusader app data in there. Okay, that's it. So we've created 4 new datasets, an app data one and a Crusader one, and a VMs dataset and a sub-dataset for Windows 10. Okay, so that's enough changes to this zpool. Let's go back to the Unraid server and use the zpool there. So to do that, first we need to export this pool. So in the top right hand corner, we want to click on that little cog icon and then click on to Export Disconnect. Be sure not to check destroy all data on this pool. That would be a disaster, all your data would be gone. But we need to tick here where it says confirm export disconnect, and then click the blue export disconnect button here. And then that will disconnect this zpool from the TrueNAS VM. Now the zpool's been exported, there's nothing listed here under pools, so now I'm going to head back across onto the Unraid server and shut down the TrueNAS VM. Okay, so now that's stopped. I go back to the main tab here. I can see all the disks here. Now if I open up a terminal window, I can now type zpool space import and then the name of the pool. And there the pool's been imported. So now I'm going to type zpool status. And there it is, all online, all looking healthy. So now I'm going to type ZFS space list. And there we can see all those data sets I just created through the GUI. So you can see it's very easy to manage the pool using the TrueNAS VM. The only two commands you really need to use is zpool import and zpool export. That's it. In fact, we could have had no zpool on the Unraid server at all and used the TrueNAS VM to create our first pool, then export it, and then import it into the Unraid server just how we've just done now with zpool import and then the name of the pool. So basically any pool you want to import into Unraid you can do with zpool import, no matter where that zpool was created, so long as the disks are present, you can import that pool.
Space Invader. If a pool fails, say a disk fails, can we repair the pool in the TrueNAS VM?
Yeah, sure we can. In fact, I'll break this pool now and remove a disk, then we'll go and repair it. So I'm going to go and pull one of these disks out of the server. Okay, and we can see that drive's now been removed. So let's open up a terminal window again and type zpool status. And we can see the pool's degraded here. So again, I'm going to export the pool in the degraded state. And the pool's now exported. So now if I go back to the VM tab here, and I go to edit, now one of these disks obviously is being removed from the server. Now if I'm not sure which one it is, all I have to do is start up the VM, and it's telling me that it can't find this disk, so I know that's the one that's missing, ending in B9J. So I'm going to go here and go edit and find that disk. Okay, it's not that one, it's this one here, B9J. So as this disk is no longer in the pool, I'm going to delete this out here, bring back up my text editor window, and I know this one here is my blank disk, so I'm going to copy this and paste this disk in instead to replace the missing one. So with that done, I'm going to scroll down and click update and start up the VM. Let's open the VNC window again just to watch it boot. Okay, so we're booted up, so let's log in. And obviously we can't see the pool here because we need to import it just like we did before. So I'm going to go across to storage here, pools, click add, import existing, and go through exactly the same as before. There's my pool, and click next and import the pool. Okay, straight away we can see that it's degraded. So now I'm going to click on the cog here and I'm going to go down here to status, and we can see here it says this drive is unavailable. So I'm going to click onto these three dots and I'm going to set the drive to offline, and I'm going to click confirm and offline. Okay, so next I'm going to click on the same three dots and I'm going to go down to here where it says replace, and now I need to tell it which disk I want to replace it with. And there's only one disk available, which is that one I passed through a moment ago, which here is labeled as VTBD2. So I'm going to select that and then I'm going to click on replace disk. Now before I click this, I know I'm going to get an error, so let me show you that and then show you how to fix it. So we can get this error here, and if I click on some more info, basically it's saying the device is too small. So this error might seem quite strange, but there's a difference between how TrueNAS defaultly creates a zpool and how we create a zpool using Open ZFS on the Unraid server. Basically, by default, TrueNAS or FreeNAS creates a swap partition on each drive in the zpool. And if I close this window here, go to System, Advanced, we can see here under Storage, it says swap size in gigabytes is 20 gigs. Obviously, because we're trying to replace the disk and add another 20 gigs, it means that it says the disk is too small. So what we need to do, if we built the zpool originally on Unraid, is to change this to 0 gigabytes. It will warn us about this, but don't worry about that. We can just click save. And now when we go back to storage, pools and status, this time when I click on to replace disk, the process will complete absolutely fine. Then once the resilvering process is finished, then we can export the pool by clicking on this cog and then going to export and confirming the export disconnect. And with the pool disconnected, we can then shut down the VM and then open a terminal window so we can re-import the pool back into Unraid. And to do that, obviously we use zpool import and then the pool name. And so with the pool imported, let's do a zpool status and have a look at it. And okay, so there's the pool, all good and healthy. So I think that will do it for this video. We'll leave it there for now. Now make sure you're subscribed to the channel if you want to see my new ZFS videos that will be coming soon. There's going to be a video about using a zpool in Unraid, using it with Docker and VMs. It will look at using snapshots, ZFS replication, all of that good stuff. And also some videos I'm calling Dark Side ZFS, and they're about, well, you have to wait and see. Anyway guys, well, if you enjoyed this video, then please hit up that like button, share the video with anyone who you think might find it useful. And before I go, I want to give a huge thank you to all of my patrons and supporters. Thank you so much guys for all you do. I really do appreciate it. It's you guys that make it possible for me to be able to make these videos. And to anyone watching who wants to join these great bunch of people, then you can find links in the description of this video on how you can support the channel. Anyway guys, it's time for me to go now, but whatever you're up to for the rest of the day, I hope it's good, and I'll catch you in the next video.